Between 2021 and 2022, inflation silently confiscated $1.8 trillion from American savers, while the banks pocketing that wealth crossed the $1 trillion revenue threshold for the first time in history. Coincidence? Let me answer that for you. No. Here's what happened. Between March 2021 and March 2022, the purchasing power of savings deposits in the United States eroded by nearly $1.8 trillion. Not because people spent it, not because they invested it poorly, because inflation, running at 8, then 9%, ate it, while their savings accounts paid them 0.5%. Do the math. You are losing roughly 8.5 cents on every dollar every year. Your money is melting in real time. Now, if you're thinking, well, that's just inflation, that's what happens, stop right there. Because this wasn't some natural disaster. This was a policy choice with a remarkably convenient timeline. And the people who made that choice, they were watching the whole time. The Federal Reserve saw inflation accelerating throughout 2021. They had the data, they had the projections, they had economists inside the building saying, this doesn't look transitory. And what did they do? They held interest rates at 0. They called it transitory. They waited. Month after month, they waited. Inflation jumped from 2% to 4%, then to 6%, then to 8%, and the policy rate still near 0. Why does that matter? Because policy rates are the anchor. They set the floor for what everything else costs. Mortgages, corporate bonds, and yes, what your savings account pays. When the central bank holds that anchor at 0 while prices surge, they create a window where wealth transfers quietly, systematically, from you to someone else. And that someone else? Let's talk about who got rich. United States banks crossed $1 trillion in annual operating revenue for the first time ever in 2023. Their net interest margins, that's the spread between what they earn on loans and what they pay you on deposits, hit the highest level since 2019. Globally, the banking sector pulled in $1.2 trillion in net income in 2024. That's not a typo. $1.2 trillion. Analysts called it the highest total ever recorded for any industry in history. How? Simple. When the Fed finally started raising rates in 2022, banks immediately hiked what they charged on loans. Your credit card rate went up. New mortgages went up. Small business lines of credit went up. But your savings account? Still paying 0.45%. The national average stayed there for months, even as the Fed pushed rates to 5.5%. That gap between what they charge and what they pay, that's pure profit. And it expanded beautifully for them. You might be wondering, why didn't my bank raise my savings rate? Because you didn't leave. Economists have a term for this. Depositors are sticky. You don't shop around. You don't move your money to another bank over a quarter-point difference. Most people never even check. Banks know this. They've studied it. They exploit it. They can keep your rate at 0 because the friction of switching banks, updating direct deposits, moving autopays, learning a new app, feels like more hassle than it's worth. So you stay, and they pocket the difference. But here's where it gets worse. Remember that $2.1 trillion in pandemic savings? The emergency checks, the reduced spending, the little cushion that households built up by mid-2021? Gone. All of it. Wiped out by March 2024. Not because people went on spending sprees, because groceries cost 25% more, because rent went up, because gas doubled. Households drew down those savings at an average pace of around $75 billion a month just to maintain their standard of living. First, inflation eroded the real value of that money. Then, households spent it trying to keep up with prices. And finally, the cushion disappeared entirely. Permanently. There's no getting it back. Think about the sequence here. Families saved during the pandemic, largely because the government handed them checks and locked down the economy. Then inflation hit. Then the Fed waited. Then prices kept rising. Then families burned through their savings. And when the dust settled, banks posted record revenues, and ordinary households had nothing left in reserve. If you designed a mechanism to transfer wealth from the middle class to financial institutions, you couldn't engineer it better than that. Now, this isn't the first time this has happened. In the 1970s, during the Great Inflation, the same pattern unfolded. Savers with fixed deposits watched their purchasing power evaporate. Borrowers with fixed-rate mortgages saw their real debt burden shrink. Banks and other lenders in the middle, they adjusted. They raised rates on new loans, kept rates low on deposits, and came out ahead. Same playbook, same winners, same losers. Just a different decade. And here's the institutional reality that nobody wants to say out loud. The Federal Reserve has a dual mandate: price stability and maximum employment. Notice what's missing? Any obligation to protect savers. Any duty to preserve the purchasing power of deposits. That's not in the rulebook. The system's architecture privileges bank profitability and borrower relief over deposit preservation. The Fed itself experienced this firsthand in 2022. It started paying 5.4% on bank reserves, money that commercial banks park at the Fed, while earning far less on the older, lower-yielding securities it holds. The Fed went into the red. And yet those higher rates, they never trickled down to ordinary savers. Because there's no rule that says they have to. Here's the strangest part of all this. When Switzerland introduced negative nominal interest rates, minus 0.5%, people noticed. There were protests, headlines, outrage. But when the United States experienced negative real interest rates of minus 7%, barely a murmur. Why? Because nominal losses show up on your bank statement. Real losses require you to do math. You have to subtract inflation from your interest rate. Most of us don't. Economists call this money illusion. We see the number, not the purchasing power. We perceive only negative nominal rates as unfair, even though negative real rates are doing the exact same thing, stealing your wealth slowly, quietly, invisibly. And it wasn't just banks. Corporate profit margins across the economy hit their highest levels since World War II during this period. Firms raised prices. They blamed supply chains. They blamed labor costs. But markups, the difference between costs and prices, expanded. Research from the Kansas City Fed found that markup growth contributed more than half of the inflation in 2021. Meanwhile, real average hourly earnings, what workers actually earn after inflation, rose by just 0.6%. Capital won, labor lost. Again. Now let me steelman the other side for a moment, because there is an argument here. Some economists say that inflation's wealth transfer from savers to borrowers is actually progressive. It helps younger, middle-class families with fixed-rate mortgages. When inflation rises, those mortgage payments become easier to handle in real terms. A $2,000 monthly payment hurts less when wages and prices are rising. The real burden of household debt shrinks. Federal Reserve research confirms this. Unexpected inflation does redistribute wealth from older, wealthier creditors to younger, middle-class debtors. So maybe this wasn't so bad after all. Here's the problem with that argument. Banks didn't lose. They didn't absorb the hit on the creditor side of that equation. Why not? Because they already sold those mortgages. They securitized them, packaged them, offloaded the risk to investors and pension funds and mortgage-backed securities holders. The banks aren't sitting there holding 30-year fixed-rate mortgages on their books, waiting for inflation to eat into their returns. They moved on. And what did they do instead? They paid you 0.5% on deposits while charging 6 or 7% on new loans. They arbitraged the entire redistribution. They captured both sides. Savers lost. Borrowers maybe won a little. Banks won big. And here's the kicker. Even now, even after the Fed started cutting rates in September 2024, the damage is permanent. Once your $10,000 becomes worth $8,200 in real terms, no future interest rate restores that gap. The purchasing power is gone. The wealth transfer is complete. The window has closed. You can't unlose what inflation already took. So what does this mean? It means this wasn't inflation doing its random, chaotic thing. This was a policy choice with entirely predictable winners and losers. When central banks delay action, when they call surging prices transitory and hold rates at zero for months, they're making a choice. When banks keep deposit rates near zero while jacking up lending rates, they're making a choice. When corporations expand markups under cover of inflation, they're making a choice. Each one of those choices shapes who pays and who profits. And over the last 4 years, the people who paid were the ones with savings. The people who profited were the ones with pricing power. The mechanism isn't hidden. It's documented. It's understood. Economists have written papers on it. Central bankers discuss it in their minutes. The lag between inflation's rise and policy response, the stickiness of depositors, the expansion of net interest margins, it's all there in the data. This isn't conspiracy, it's institutional design, and the design works exactly as intended. Wealth flows upward, quietly, while most people never even notice the math. So here's the question you should be asking. Whose interests was the system protecting when it mattered most? Yours or theirs?